Once upon a time, in a big bright village filled with singing birds and tall dancing trees, there lived a young girl named Bukumi. Bukumi was a special girl with a big smile and sparkly eyes. She was the only child of the richest couple in the village. Everyone in the village knew her and said, "Look, there goes Bukumi, the gem of our village." Bukumi's mother and father loved her so very much. They had a big house, the biggest one could see, with many rooms filled with laughter and love. Around their house, there were farms with lots of fruits and vegetables, and fields that stretched wide under the sun. Her father owned the biggest store in the market, where people came from all over to buy things. They had shiny jewels that twinkled like stars, and soft clothes that felt like the touch of a cloud. Bukumi's parents gave her everything she needed, and her heart was full of joy. Everywhere Bukumi went, she went with her mother and father. They took her to colorful markets, to sparkling rivers, and to visit friends in nearby villages. Everyone who met Bukumi loved her because she was kind and sweet, just like her parents. But the best part? In Bukumi's house, there was a secret, a big secret. There was one room that nobody ever went into. Even Bukumi didn't go in there. It was the mystery room, and it made her home feel like a castle with hidden treasures. So, in her big, beautiful house, with her loving mother and father, Bukumi's life was like a wonderful dream. And that's how our story begins, with a girl whose life was filled with blessings and a secret waiting to be discovered. One sunny day, something very sad happened. Bukumi's mother and father went on a trip across the big blue river to visit some friends in another village. They were traveling in their canoe, the one painted with beautiful patterns and bright colors. Bukumi didn't go with them because she was feeling a little sick, so she stayed at home, resting. But that day, the river was trickier than anyone thought. It swirled and twirled, faster and wilder than usual. Bukumi's mother and father tried to steer their canoe carefully, but the water was too strong. Suddenly, with a big splash, their canoe tipped over and capsized. It was a very big accident, and oh, it was so sad because Bukumi's mother and father didn't come back. They went to the stars above, leaving little Bukumi all alone. When the news reached the village, everyone felt a great sadness. Bukumi was very, very sad. She missed her mother and father so much. Her tears fell like raindrops, and her smile was gone. The villagers, who loved her parents and her, came to her house. They brought her food, they hugged her, and they cried with her. To show respect for her mother and father, the people in the village did something very special. They decided to close the market for a few days. No one bought or sold anything. Instead, they remembered all the good times they had with Bukumi's parents. They talked about how kind and generous they were and how they made the village a brighter place. The big bright village was quiet during those days, quieter than it had ever been. The trees seemed to whisper softly, and even the birds sang gently. Everyone was mourning, showing their love for Bukumi's family and hoping to comfort her in her big loss. And so, the village stood still, and the little girl with the big smile, now filled with sadness, learned that sometimes, even in the brightest places, sad things can happen. But her village was with her, holding her hand through it all. In Bukumi's big, beautiful house, where every room was filled with laughter and love, there was one room that was different. It was the forbidden room, a room so secret that even Bukumi, the little princess of the house, was never allowed to peek inside. This room had a big old wooden door with a heavy lock that glinted in the sunlight. The key to the lock was hidden, and nobody talked about where it might be. The walls around the door were draped in colorful cloths, making it look mysterious and important. Now, this wasn't just any room. Oh no, it was a room wrapped in whispers and shadows. The older servants in the house, those who had been there since Bukumi was just a baby, knew something about this room. They knew that it held a secret so big that it could scare the stars away from the sky. Long ago, before Bukumi was born, there were curious servants who wondered what was behind that door. They tried to listen at the keyhole or peek under the door. But oh dear, those who tried too hard to find out the secret disappeared. Just like that. Poof! One day they were there, and the next day they were gone. Nobody knew where they went, and after a while, no one dared to talk about them anymore. The other servants whispered among themselves, "Never go near that room. If you do, you might vanish too, like the wind that disappears at the end of the day." So they just cleaned around the door, never touching it, always walking past it quickly, with their heads down. Bukumi knew about the room, of course. Her parents had told her, "That's a special room, my dear. We must never go inside. It's for the best." And because she loved and trusted her parents, Bukumi never asked why. She just nodded and played, her little heart beating fast whenever she passed by the forbidden room. So, the room stayed locked and silent, holding its breath and its secrets, while the big house buzzed with life around it. It was like a quiet shadow in a sea of sunshine, always there, always waiting. After the sad loss of her parents, Bukumi needed help to take care of her big, lovely house. So one sunny morning, she decided to find new helpers. That's when she met Simi and Abu, the only twins in the whole village. They were known for being very kind and very hardworking, and everyone liked them because they always smiled and said nice things. Simi was as bright as the morning sun, always ready to lend a hand or share a laugh. Her brother, Abu, was just as cheerful, but a bit quieter, always thinking, always watching carefully to learn things quickly. They were like two peas in a pod, never far from one another. And they took care of each other just as well as they took care of everything else. Bukumi liked them right away. She saw how neatly they did their work and how politely they spoke to everyone. "You two will be perfect for my house," she told them with a hopeful smile, trying to make her big, quiet house feel like a home again. The twins were happy to help Bukumi. They moved into the servants' quarters and started their new jobs the very next day. They swept the floors, polished the furniture, and made sure everything in the house was just right. Simi loved to sing while she worked, and her voice was so sweet that even the birds would stop to listen. Abu, on the other hand, was great at fixing things. No broken gate or leaky roof lasted long with him around. As they worked, they respected all the house's rules, especially the one about the forbidden room. They had heard whispers about it from the other servants. "That's the room no one goes into," they were told, and they nodded seriously, understanding the importance of the rule. Bukumi felt a little lighter with the twins around. Their cheerful ways brought new joy to her home, and their loyalty was clear. They cared about her and the house deeply. It seemed like, with Simi and Abu there, the shadows in the corners of the big house were a little less dark, and the silence a little less quiet. So, life at Bukumi's house began to find a new rhythm, with the laughter and chatter of the loyal twins filling the air. But the secret of the forbidden room lingered, a silent question that hung in the air like a soft whisper, waiting, always waiting. The second anniversary of Bukumi's parents' passing was approaching, and the whole house was busy preparing for the remembrance ceremony. It was a big event in the village, and everyone wanted everything to look perfect to honor their memory. Simi and Abu were especially busy, cleaning every corner and making sure the house sparkled. As they cleaned, they moved from room to room, dusting, sweeping, and arranging. But there was one room they hadn't touched, the forbidden room. Simi, ever curious, noticed that despite all their cleaning, the door to that room stayed firmly shut, its lock shiny and unmarked by fingerprints. One day while they were preparing, Simi turned to Abu and whispered, "Have you ever wondered what's inside that room? We've cleaned everywhere else, but that room, we've never even opened the door." Abu looked at the door, his eyes filled with curiosity, but also caution. "Yes, but remember what the others said. It's forbidden for us, for anyone. We shouldn't think about it too much." But the question had already planted itself in Simi's mind. Later that day, she found a moment to ask Bukumi. "Miss Bukumi," she began gently, "there's one room we haven't cleaned. With so many people coming for the ceremony, shouldn't we clean it too?" Bukumi, who was arranging some flowers, paused and looked towards the forbidden room. Her face turned a bit serious, and her voice was firm. "No, Simi, that room is fine. It doesn't need to be cleaned. And I need you to promise me, you and Abu, never to worry about that room. It must stay closed." Simi nodded, a little disappointed, but respecting Bukumi's wishes. "Yes, Miss Bukumi," she replied. But the mystery of the room tugged at her heart. Why was it so important to keep it closed? What was inside that made it so special? That evening, Simi and Abu talked about it in hushed tones. "Maybe it's full of treasure," Simi guessed, her imagination running wild. "Or maybe it's a secret place where stories of old are kept," Abu added, loving a good mystery as much as his sister. Despite their curiosity, they both agreed to follow Bukumi's instructions. They didn't go near the room again, focusing on their duties and the upcoming ceremony. But the seed of wonder had been sown, and both knew that the question of what lay behind that locked door wouldn't leave them alone. It was a riddle wrapped in a mystery, hidden just out of reach, and it called to them, soft and persistent in the quiet moments of their days. As the day of the remembrance ceremony drew closer, the village buzzed with activity. People from nearby villages and even distant ones began arriving, their voices and footsteps filling the air with anticipation and respect. Bukumi's home became the center of activity, with guests admiring its beauty and the careful preparations. Simi and Abu worked tirelessly, making sure every guest felt welcome and every corner of the house was perfect. However, the presence of so many visitors and the constant talk about honoring the past only made the mystery of the forbidden room more tantalizing to them. The room seemed to call to them, a whisper among the louder echoes of the bustling house. One quiet evening, after a long day of preparations, Simi and Abu sat together in the kitchen. The house was calm for a moment, and the twins shared their thoughts. "Everyone is talking about memories and secrets," Simi said, her eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and wonder. "And there, we have a room full of secrets right here, and we know nothing about it." Abu nodded, his curiosity also rekindled by the day's chatter. "It's strange, isn't it, to have a part of the house that even we can't see. What could be so important or dangerous that it needs to be locked away?" The twins looked at each other, a silent agreement forming between them. They knew they were told never to enter, but the mystery was too much. They decided they had to know what was inside the forbidden room. "But we must be careful," Abu said, the cautious part of him coming to the forefront. "We can't just walk in. We need a plan. Something that makes sure we don't end up like those who disappeared. Simi agreed, and together they devised a simple but clever plan. They decided that one of them would enter the room first, while the other waited outside. The one inside would quickly look around and come back out to share what they saw. This way, they hoped to satisfy their curiosity without the risk of both getting into trouble at the same time. We'll do it early in the morning, proposed Simi, when most are still asleep and the others are busy with their own tasks. Abu agreed. And we'll be quick about it. If anything feels wrong, we come right back out. No lingering inside. Their plan set, the twins felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. They knew they were disobeying a direct order, but the pull of the unknown was too strong to resist. They went to bed that night with their secret plan tucked away, dreaming of what they might find behind the mysterious door. The forbidden room awaited them, silent and still, holding its breath for the morning. The next morning arrived quietly. Early in the morning, when it was still a bit dark outside, Simi and Abu woke up feeling both excited and a bit scared. They quietly got out of bed, trying not to make any noise that would wake the other servants or the guests who were already up. They walked softly to the forbidden room. As they got closer, the air felt cooler, and the hallway seemed to stretch out longer than usual. The door of the room looked big and old, and it was cold when Simi touched it. Abu stood watch while Simi, taking a deep breath, slowly turned the handle. The lock clicked open surprisingly easily, as if it had been waiting for them all this time. Simi pushed the door open with her foot and stepped inside, her heart racing. The moment Simi crossed the threshold, the light from the hallway seemed to disappear, swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. She blinked, trying to adjust her eyes, but it was no use. Abu, it's all dark. I can't see anything, she called out, her voice tinged with panic. Outside, Abu strained to hear his sister's voice. As he focused on the sounds from the room, his own world began to dim, the sounds muffling as if he was diving deep underwater. Suddenly, he realized he couldn't hear anything at all. Not Simi, not the distant early birds, nothing. Fearing for his sister, Abu stepped into the room, hoping to find her by feeling his way. As he crossed the same threshold, his sight remained, but the silence engulfed him. His ability to speak or hear was gone. He could see the room, a plain space with nothing but an old chest in the center, but he couldn't hear his own footsteps or the worried calls of his sister. Simi, blind in her dark world, could hear her brother moving but couldn't see him. Abu, can you see me? She shouted, her voice echoing strangely in the darkness that surrounded her. Abu, unable to hear her cries, moved closer, his hands outstretched trying to communicate. He saw Simi's outline, her hands reaching out in the dark, but his voice, when he tried to speak, made no sound. Frustrated and scared, he reached out and finally touched her arm. They stood there, one enveloped in silence, the other in darkness, both trapped in their separate experiences of the room's mysterious curse. Panic set in as they realized they could neither fully communicate nor escape the effects of the room. Abu led Simi by the hand, guiding her back to the door, hoping that leaving the room would end their ordeal. But as they stepped back across the threshold, the door swung shut with an ominous thud, trapping them inside. Simi's blindness and Abu's deafness continued, their senses cut off, leaving them isolated in their own versions of darkness. The forbidden room had ensnared them, its secret far more sinister and powerful than they had ever imagined. Simi, who still had her voice, shouted loudly, and Abu, who can still see, hit the door over and over again, hoping someone was nearby. But neither the sound from Simi's voice nor Abu's push came out of the room. It was an entirely different world in there. Back outside, as the day of the ceremony dawned, the village was buzzing with activity and excitement. Bukumi, busy with the final preparations, hadn't noticed the absence of Simi and Abu at first, but as hours passed and the twins were nowhere to be seen, her concern grew. They were always punctual, always where she needed them, their absence completely out of character. Bukumi, we haven't seen Simi or Abu this morning, one of the servants whispered to her, worry creasing his brow. Bukumi's heart sank. They had never missed a day of work, let alone on such an important day. She quickly organized a search. Check everywhere, she instructed, her voice tense with urgency. Look in the gardens, the storerooms, every room in the house. Find them. The servants scattered, calling out the twins' names, their voices echoing through the corridors and across the grounds. But there was no reply, no sign of Simi or Abu. The other servants checked the usual places, the kitchen, the garden, the market path, but found nothing. As the sun climbed higher, the unease turned to panic. Bukumi felt a dread settling in her chest. Where could they be? She muttered to herself, trying to remember the last time she saw them. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. By the time the guests began to arrive for the ceremony, the whole household was in disarray. However, Bukumi told her servants not to tell anyone about the missing twins, not even the chiefs or their parents. She wanted to keep the secret within the household. As the day turned into evening and there was still no sign of Simi and Abu, Bukumi's worry turned to fear. She knew the twins wouldn't leave without telling her, especially not today. Something was wrong, very wrong. I've looked everywhere, Miss Bukumi, the head servant reported, his face drawn with concern. They're nowhere in the house or on the grounds. Bukumi's mind raced to the forbidden room. Had they? Would they? She pushed the thought away, too afraid of what it might mean. Bukumi, could they have gone to the village for something? One of the young servants suggested, trying to offer a benign explanation. Bukumi shook her head, feeling a chill. They would have told me, she said quietly, her gaze drifting towards the house, towards the room that no one was supposed to enter. The search continued into the night, lanterns flickering in the dark as servants and some willing guests combed every possible corner. But as the night deepened, hope dimmed. Bukumi stood by her window, looking out at the dark shapes of the search parties, feeling a deep, cold fear. She knew the village, her home, was full of secrets, and she dreaded that the twins might have stumbled upon one they shouldn't have. The house felt different that night, heavier, as if it too missed the presence of the loyal twins. Bukumi felt alone, truly alone for the first time since her parents' death, surrounded by whispers and shadows and the weight of a secret she did not fully understand. A few days passed since the disappearance of Simi and Abu, and the atmosphere in Bukumi's house had shifted from worry to a tense, uneasy silence. Each morning brought no news of the twins, and each night fell heavier than the last. The vibrant spirit that once filled the house seemed to have vanished along with them. Then, something strange and terrible began to unfold. It started subtly at first, a faint, unpleasant smell that seemed to drift through the corridors of the large house. At first, Bukumi thought it might be a spoiled piece of food or a problem with the waste bins. But as the hours passed, the smell grew stronger, more pungent, and unmistakably the scent of decay. Bukumi's heart sank as the smell permeated every room, becoming so overpowering that it was impossible to ignore. The servants whispered anxiously among themselves, their faces pinched with fear. "What is that awful smell?" they muttered, covering their noses with cloths as they moved through their chores. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a shadowed cave, filled with a looming, dreadful stench. Bukumi wandered through her home, her face drawn and pale, her thoughts racing. The scent seemed to seep out of the walls themselves, filling every corner with a sense of doom. By the evening of the third day, the smell had become unbearable. The servants barely spoke as they moved about, their eyes wide with fear. They knew such a smell could only mean one thing, and none dared to say it aloud. In the dead of night, Bukumi lay in her bed, the smell infiltrating her room, making her stomach churn. Sleep was impossible. Her mind was haunted by visions of what could cause such a stench. The forbidden room flashed in her mind, its door shut tight, its secrets locked inside. Could it be? Her heart pounded at the thought. The next morning, unable to bear it any longer, Bukumi called her most trusted female servant. "This can't go on," she said firmly, trying to mask her fear with resolve. "We need to find the source of this smell. It's unbearable." As the day wore on, the tension in the air thickened, the foul odor hanging like a cloud over the house. The servants' faces were lined with dread, each wondering if they would be the next to vanish, swallowed up by the house's dark secrets. The sun set with no resolution, the house shrouded not just in darkness, but in a palpable fear of the unknown. Whispers filled the halls, speculations of curses and ghosts, of wrath from beyond the grave. Bukumi felt the weight of her family's legacy pressing down on her, the hidden truths of her home becoming a burden she could no longer bear alone. As the dawn broke over the village, the head servant, overwhelmed by the foul smell and driven by fear for the safety of everyone in the house, made a decision that would change everything. He quietly left the house and walked through the still sleeping village to seek the wisdom of the elders. This was not a decision he made lightly, for it was known that involving the elders meant bringing the entire village into the affairs of Bukumi's household, something Bukumi had always tried to avoid. The elders gathered in the village meeting hut, a place where important decisions were made and disputes settled. The head servant, his face etched with worry, told them of the mysterious disappearance of Simi and Abu, the unbearable smell, and the shadow of fear that had fallen over Bukumi's home. The elders listened intently, their expressions grave. They knew the history of the house, the whispers of secrets kept, and the weight of the tragedies that seemed to linger around Bukumi's family. After a moment of silent discussion among themselves, they decided it was time to intervene, for the safety of the entire village might be at stake. Led by the head elder, a group made their way to Bukumi's house. Bukumi was taken aback by their sudden appearance, but understood the seriousness of their visit. The head elder, with a voice both gentle and firm, addressed her. "Bukumi, you are a cherished member of our village, and your welfare and that of your household concerns us all. We must search the house thoroughly to uncover the source of this trouble." Bukumi, feeling the weight of her ancestors' secrets bearing down upon her, nodded in silent consent. Together with the elders, the servants resumed the search, now with an air of solemnity and purpose, driven by the elders' presence. They went through each room systematically until only one remained, the forbidden room. Bukumi hesitated at the door, her heart racing. The head elder noticed her reluctance and gently asked, "What lies beyond this door, Bukumi?" Bukumi swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. It is a place of old family secrets, ones not even I am privy to. My parents forbade entry to all. With a nod of understanding yet resolute determination, the head elder approached the door. Before he touched it, Bukumi exclaimed, "No, please, don't open the door. Please, it's a family secret which I don't know of." Her plea hung in the air, but it was too late. The elder turned the handle, the lock clicking open as if it had been waiting for this very moment. The door swung open, and the group was immediately hit by the full force of the dreadful stench. They stepped inside, peeping into the room. There in the plain room, the tragic truth lay revealed. Simi and Abu's bodies were found lying lifeless on the floor, their faces peaceful yet pale. A wave of sorrow swept through the room, the reality of their fate drawing gasps and murmurs from the gathered crowd. The village elders turned to Bukumi, their faces a mix of sorrow and concern. It was clear now that something dark and mysterious had claimed the lives of two innocent souls within these walls. Bukumi, tears streaming down her face, could only shake her head, her worst fears realized. This discovery marked a turning point as the village came together to mourn the loss of Simi and Abu and to support Bukumi in her time of grief. The secrets of the forbidden room were secrets no longer, and the shadows that had hung over the house began to lift. Dispelled by the light of truth and the compassion of the community, the discovery of Simi and Abu's bodies within the forbidden room sent shockwaves through the village. Grief turned quickly to anger as whispers spread like wildfire. By morning, those whispers had formed into a dark cloud of suspicion that hovered solely over Bukumi. As the villagers gathered in the central square, the murmurs grew louder. How could such a thing happen right under her roof? One person questioned. She must have known, another accused. The idea took root that perhaps Bukumi had used the twins for some dark ritual to renew her parents' wealth, a continuation of the mysterious practices believed to be part of her family's legacy. Despite her protests and pleas of ignorance, the community's fear and anger were unassailable. Bukumi stood in the middle of the village square, surrounded by her once friendly neighbors, now looking at her with eyes filled with judgment and fear. The village elders, pressured by the crowd's fury, reluctantly called for a decision. "We must ensure such a tragedy never occurs again," the head elder announced gravely. "Bukumi, you are accused of harboring dark secrets that have led to the death of two of our beloved. What do you say in your defense?" Bukumi, overwhelmed by the sea of hostile faces, could barely speak. "I knew nothing of any darkness in that room," she cried, her voice trembling. "I respected my parents' wishes to keep it closed just as they instructed. I am innocent of these accusations." Her words, however, fell on deaf ears. The pain of the loss was too great, and the need for blame too strong. The village, blinded by grief and stirred by fear, made a fateful decision. "For the safety of us all, we cannot allow this shadow to linger over our village," declared an elder. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the square, the sentence was carried out. Bukumi was tied to a wooden post at the edge of the village. Despite her continued pleas for mercy and understanding, the air was filled with the sound of flint striking steel. Tears streamed down Bukumi's face as the first sparks caught the dry wood piled around her feet. The fire quickly took hold, and as the flames began to rise, Bukumi's despair turned to fury. "I curse this village," she screamed over the roar of the fire. "Just as you accuse me wrongly, may you too face false accusations and feel this same helpless rage." Her tragic end was met with silence from the crowd, many of whom now watched with a mix of horror and remorse. As the flames engulfed her, the sky above darkened, and a cold wind swept through the square, as if nature itself mourned the grave injustice being done. That night, the village did not celebrate justice. It mourned a loss that was deeper and more profound than it understood. Bukumi's curse, whether born of real powers or merely the bitterness of a wrongful death, lingered in the hearts of all as they dispersed, each person carrying a shard of the tragedy back to their silent homes. The memory of the fire's heat and Bukumi's final, anguished cries would haunt the village for generations to come. Years went by, and the sad story of Bukumi became something the villagers only whispered about. The spot where she was last seen was left alone, a burnt patch of ground that nobody wanted to touch. The village looked the same, but it felt different. People felt bad about what had happened and often thought about Bukumi's last angry words. Then something happened that made everyone remember Bukumi's curse. A faraway village accused them of stealing a very old and valuable crown. Even though the villagers said they didn't do it and there was no real proof, the accusation stuck. People started avoiding the village and friends looked at them strangely. The village leaders had to go explain themselves to a big chief who asked them tough questions, just like they had once asked Bukumi. They tried really hard to show they were innocent, but no one seemed to believe them, just like no one had believed Bukumi. The big chief barred anyone from entering the village for 10 years, which means they will have to grow the food they eat by themselves, make their own clothes, and won't be able to get new things or see anywhere outside the village for a whole 10 years. It was just like an open prison for the villagers. As this hard time went on, the villagers started to see how unfair they had been to Bukumi. They remembered how they had let fear make them do something very wrong. They realized that being too quick to judge someone could lead to terrible mistakes. The older villagers, now with gray hair, would meet and talk about what had happened. We can't let fear and anger decide for us, they would say. We should remember Bukumi and learn from our mistakes. We need to look for the truth carefully and treat everyone fairly. After many years, the real thieves were caught trying to sell the stolen crown, and the village was no longer blamed. Everyone felt relieved, but they also thought a lot about what had happened. They worked to fix their friendships and make sure they were seen as trustworthy again. But they were more careful this time. In the middle of the village, they put up a small stone for Bukumi, covered with wildflowers. It had words on it that said, "In memory of Bukumi, whose sad story teaches us to be careful with the truth and not rush." Here's what we can learn from this story. For parents, be careful about the choices you make, especially those that could affect your children. They might end up dealing with consequences for things they didn't even know about or understand, just like Bukumi. For workers, if you've been told not to do something at work, there's usually a good reason for it. Remember Abu and Simi and the forbidden room? They went into a place they were told to avoid, and it led to big problems that eventually cost their lives. So, always follow the rules you're given to stay safe and keep out of trouble. For communities, it's easy to let anger or fear make decisions for us, but that often leads to mistakes and unfair actions, just like what happened to Bukumi. Instead, we should take the time to listen to all sides of a story and really understand what's going on before we act. This way, we can make fair and wise choices and avoid hurting others for something they did not do because of misunderstandings or quick judgments. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, Share it with your family and friends. Comment on it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.